The 2025 NFL Draft has come and gone, and tonight we're going to recap the drafts of the teams of the NFC East. Welcome, everybody. My name is Joshua Klein. I am your host of the Draft Beard Podcast. Tonight, we're going to be going over the drafts of the teams from the NFC East. So we're going to be discussing the Commanders, the Cowboys, the Eagles, and the Giants. We'll be going over their draft classes, recapping them, giving you some of my favorite picks and maybe some of my least favorite picks or puzzling picks, and maybe handing out a draft grade. But before we get to that, if you could do me a favor, if you could like, subscribe, and share, I would really, really appreciate it. It really does help boost this content out to those who are most interested, especially things that are NFL and NFL draft related, maybe sports related. So again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget also hit that notification bell. If you are subscribed, number one, why aren't you subscribed? And the next one is, if you hit that notification bell, you will know exactly when an episode of the Draft Beard Podcast drops. You'll get notified right away. So tonight we're going to be recapping the drafts of the NFC East. There were some pretty good drafts throughout this division. Quite a few better grades. I think the four teams from this division all came away with some pretty good drafts. And we're going to get started right away with talking about the team from the nation's capital, and that's the Washington Commanders. So the Washington Commanders, they didn't have a lot of picks this year. Remember, they made some trades to get Deebo Samuel. They made a trade to get Laremy Tunsil. So they've used draft capital to get some veterans on the roster to help them to win right now. They had an unexpectedly very successful season. Jaden Daniels had one of the best rookie seasons you'll ever see from a quarterback. So they are in more of a win now position. Jaden Daniels has really helped propel them to that. And so not having very many draft picks, but they did make some good use of them. So in round one at 29 overall, they went with the tackle Josh Conerly Jr. So that helped completes their offseason of really helping revamp the tackle positions there. I really liked Josh Conerly. I had him on my value board, big board, at 32. The consensus had him at 33. And so pretty decent value. I did think he was one of those guys who might be a sneaky first round tackle. He's an excellent pass blocking tackle. He doesn't give up sacks. Really good player. I think he has the talent to develop into a really quality starter. So he's not, one of the more exciting tackles. A lot of those went early in the first round. The tackles went kind of early, and Simmons went ahead of Simmons went to Kansas City, right behind the Washington Commanders there. So I like this pick. I know maybe Commanders fans would say, hey, why did we take Simmons? Some better overall talent. And that might be the case, but Conerly is going to be ready to perform this year. And I think he's a very quality pass blocking tackle. I think it's a pretty solid pick. I know it's not flashy. I thought maybe you might see the Commanders look to go with maybe a running back, but Omarion Hampton went there. I thought they would come away with the running back higher in this class, but we'll get back to that a little bit later. Maybe a safety. I thought a sneaky pick there might have been going with a Nick Emanwari there late in the first round. A wide receiver was another little area I thought maybe that they could sneak in. But I think overall going with the tackle is a solid pick by the Commanders. Fits right in with the value. Not the most flashy pick, but a really good pick. And in round two, they came back with 61st overall, a player I really, really liked. And that was Trey Amos, the cornerback out of Ole Miss. I was much higher on Trey Amos than the consensus. If you can see from my graphic there, you will see that I had Trey Amos at 25 on my big. And he went at 61 in the second round. So that was exceptional value. Loved Trey Amos' game. I think he could be a really solid press man corner. He's really steady. I think he could play zone if he needed to. Really good tackler, good ball skills. I really liked Trey Amos. That is a solid, exceptional pick there in the second round, getting some value in the second round. Now, Marcus Lattimore, who they acquired from the Saints last year, hasn't really performed like they thought he would. So I think this is good insurance. I think this is a good job at filling in our needed roster spot. I think Amos can play right there on the outside. You move Sanders still back into nickel, where he probably is going to perform best. He did perform well this year on the outside. He was one of my sneaky guys in last year's draft that I really liked. So overall, that's a very solid pick. Great value for the Commanders there in the second round. And then they didn't have a third round pick. They come away at pick 128 in the fourth round, and they grabbed Jalen Lane, the wide receiver out of Virginia Tech. I was pretty high on him as well. I had Jalen in my top 100. I had it at number 98. Consensus big board much lower at 165. I kind of get it. I know that he is not the world's greatest route runner, but he has just exceptional speed. And even though he doesn't have great route runners, he can get off the line really quick. And that 4.34 speed, if you can get him the ball, watch out. He is one of the fastest and most dynamic players in this draft. I think he was underrated at Virginia Tech. I didn't see a fourth, fifth round graded player in Jalen Lane. I had him rated as a third round grade in my wide receiver class. He was my number 13th overall receiver. Again, it made it into my top 100. Again, the Commanders come away with really, really good value there in the first round in Jalen Lane. That's a solid pick at pick 128. Excellent value. Then we come back, and they didn't have a pick in the fifth round. They come in the sixth round at pick 205, and they picked up Kane Medrano, the linebacker out of UCLA. He's 6'3", 230 pounds. I think he's a decent athlete. Good speed. I think he can play all over the field. He needs to kind of refine his game a little bit. He kind of just gets himself out of position. I liked Kane there. It's a pretty solid pick. Overall, the linebacking class wasn't that great of a class. It's kind of right there in value. I had Kane as a sixth round graded player. He was at 215 on my board. He went 205. So that's pretty good, right? Kind of spot on. Really good value there. And then they come back in the seventh round at pick 245, and they get a sneaky player in Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Now, he was a harder player to evaluate with all the issues with eligibility that he had at the University of Arizona this year. But when you go back and you watch the tape, man, he is an exciting player. I had him at number 145 on my big board. He went 100 spots better compared to my big board. The consensus had him at 249. And I know it's a hard thing to do when you don't see that player for a year. I do struggle with players who don't play for a season or have extended lengths of time, basically a whole season of not being able to play. I have seen over time that hasn't worked out well for players, just barring injury, not a catastrophic injury. So I really liked Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. That could be a really good sneaky pick there in finding a starter. I had Ja'Cory in my top 20 of my running backs. I had him at number 18. I had him as a fourth round grade. I think he could develop into a starting running back in the NFL level, and getting that in the seventh round again is exceptional value. And so overall, I had the Commanders. My favorite pick was Trey Amos. Loved that pick. Exceptional value. He was my third rated corner in this year's class. The best value, and they had a lot of it in this draft class. I went with Krosky-Merritt, the running back, just getting him in the seventh round, when I thought if they would have came and they would have taken him, in the fourth round there at pick 128 instead of Jalen Lane, I wouldn't have batted an eye. Taking him at 205 instead of Medrano, wouldn't have batted an eye as well. That is exceptional value as well. So overall, they did a very good job at playing the draft board, whether you look at mine or the consensus. They didn't really overdraft or reach for anybody. They didn't have a lot of picks to go to kind of fill out their draft board. Overall, I gave the Commanders a very solid B. I remember they're drafting at the end of the draft there. I think they're going to come away with at least two starters out of this draft and some guys who can contribute. I mean, Jalen Lane, but the overall depth of the class just wasn't there. I think it was a very solid draft, not like exceptional, nobody that's going to wow you, but a very good, solid B draft for the Washington Commanders. Nobody really that they took out of value in terms of positional value on the draft board. So I think the Commanders had a really good offseason. It's a really good tying that bow right there at the end. Really good, solid draft for the Washington Commanders. And next up, let's head over to Dallas and talk about the Dallas Cowboys. and their draft class from the 2025 NFL draft. And there's a little bit more to talk about here with the Dallas Cowboys. As in round one, they went with Tyler Booker, the guard out of Alabama. And now I know that taking him at 12, everyone has pretty much the same opinion. That was a pretty big reach. Consensus had him at 31 on their draft board, and I had him at 53. Now, the thing with Tyler, though, is because of his play style, there weren't very many teams in the NFL that would be best to utilize him and have the best scheme fit. You want to be mano a mano, that power run game, that power style, then Tyler Booker is the guy for you. So I think the teams that had him higher on his draft board were limited. Not that he's a really good player, and he's a kind of player he want with a demeanor that you're going to want on your team. Yes, he was drafted early, but if you're a team that really liked him, I could understand that. I remember seeing early in the draft process, you saw guys like Daniel Jeremiah and some of the bigger names in the industry who are well connected with scouts and what teams are thinking. It sent really good flag that Tyler was probably going to be much higher on some teams' draft boards than what the draft media was saying. And I think if you ran a scheme that fit what Tyler Booker could do for you, you were really, really going to like him. And if not, you were really, really not going to like it. So I understand kind of the angst there and the controversy with taking Tyler Booker at 12 overall. It's rich. I get it. It's a huge reach on my board. I had Tyler Booker as a 3rd round grade. Remember, I'm looking at this from a broader perspective at all teams. So I can understand if you were looking, again, same thing as that type of player. I like more athletic guys on my offensive line who can, pull, who can do really well on the screen game. So those big, meaty guys are just not my forte in the offensive line. But I think Tyler can succeed with Dallas. They've done a good job with developing offensive line in Dallas. I think he's going to pair very well next to Cooper Beebe. So I think it can work out. Yes, is it high? The pay scale is going to be a little high for drafting him at 12. So, but I get it. And then when you look at the context of the draft, which we're going to get into now, it looks even better. So you come back in round 2 at 44 overall, and you get one of my favorite pass rushers in the draft in Donovan Ezeiruaku out of Boston College. I loved Donovan Ezeiruaku. I mean, if I go to my edge rankings, I had Donovan as my 4th rated edge player in this draft. He was my top 2nd round graded edge rusher. 6'2 and a half, 248 pounds. What a talented player. He put up huge sack numbers at Boston College. He's really good with his hands. I think he's going to pair very well on the opposite side of Micah Parsons. That's a phenomenal pick. I really thought that Donovan, basically where his draft kind of started was somewhere around Atlanta at pick 15. If you told me that the Cowboys took Donovan at pick 12, I would have been, okay, I could see it, right? I think that would have been, no one would have really hit them too hard for taking him at 12. Still probably a little bit of a reach, but basically being that first edge rusher off the board outside of Abdul Carter, I think people could have kind of understood that. Again, solid pick. I had him on my big board at 21 overall. He went 44 overall. That's huge value. The consensus had him at 38. So even compared to the consensus big board, still got great value in Donovan Ezeiruaku, and they're going to really help their pass rush with Donovan. I understand some of the pressure rates don't actually kind of equal out the sack totals that he had in college, but I think he's going to be a really good, solid pro and a great pick for Dallas. You come back in round 3 at pick 76. And again, you get exceptional value. Chavon Ravel going in the 3rd round. I had him on my big board at 42 overall. The consensus had him at 34. He was my number 6 overall corner. I would not have been surprised if in the back end of the 1st round, say a team like the Rams or the Bills or one of those teams, the Vikings, had taken Chavon there or much earlier in the 2nd round. Wouldn't have been surprised at all. And Dallas was able to score Chavon Ravel in the third round. Phenomenal pick. Now, I know he has the injury concerns, but Dallas needs some help at cornerback. They have some injury concerns with their secondary. They need some depth. Will Chavone be ready to go full speed at the beginning of the season? Who knows? We'll see. But I love that pick for Chavone. His ACL injury was early enough in the college season that I think that this season he can provide some value. So that's a great pick by the Dallas Cowboys. Now, if you looked at these first 3 rounds and you put it kind of in a box there, it kind of reminds me of that Lions draft a few years ago, and they took Gibbs and Campbell and Laporta and Branch, and you just jumbled them around a little bit. And maybe you had Branch first, and you had Gibbs later, or then Laporta, or however you wanted to put them in order. This draft looks completely different. If you told me that you had Ezeiruaku in the first round, you came back with Booker and then Ravel, or you had Ezeiruaku, Ravel, and then Booker, totally different. But you come away with a really good, solid group of players there, really solid players that I think can develop into really good starters, above average starters. There's some players there that, maybe they can sneak in a Pro Bowl in their career. So really good start on the first 3 picks of their draft. You come back into round 5. I think they get a sneaky good running back in Jaden Blue. Now, I didn't have him as high as maybe a lot of other pundits. I had Jaden Blue on my big board at 160. The Cowboys take him at 149. Consensus had him at 153. So again, the first 4 picks that they've made here were pretty good value based on the board. I know that there are some other people who thought out there that, Jaden Blue might be taken a little earlier in the draft, but he is a speed demon. He is a home run hitter. I think can really help Dallas there, be a third down back, get him involved in the receiving game. So good value there. And then this is where the draft kind of I don't want to say falls apart, because once you get later in the draft, you're looking for, maybe you can find a starter out there, but you're looking for special teams contributors, some backups, provide some depth, and they end up coming with Shamar James out of the University of Florida. If you see, I had him on my big board. I didn't have him ranked in my top 257 players. So there are 257 picks this year. If you see where it is red there on that board, then that just tells you that I did not have that player ranked in my top 257. So I didn't have Shamar James there as a draftable grade. Then we come back in the 6th round. They pick Andre Cornelius, another big, beefy offensive lineman, a tackle out of the University of Oregon. Now, the consensus big board was much higher on him at 152. I did not have him in my top 257. I didn't get as much time to get really in depth in some of these players at the very, very back end of the draft. So I didn't have Cornelius as a draftable grade. He's a big mauling interior defensive line. Offensive lineman. He's really going to help in the run game. And then you come back with pick 217. And that is Jay Toya, the defensive tackle out of the University of California, Los Angeles, so the UCLA Bruins. I had him at 186. The consensus didn't have him in their top 257 on their board. So I liked that pick. That's good value there in the 7th round. I think you can get a rotational defensive lineman there. I think Jay, he's a run stuffing nose tackle type. He's not going to be a pass rusher. He's 6'2", 342 pounds. So he is kind of like a big ball of meat. I think that's good value in the 7th round to just find a space eater. And then they come back at pick 239. They get the running back out of Clemson. He's a big running back. He's opposite of what they grabbed in Jaden Blue. So you got a little bit more of the short yardage kind of pounder back. I didn't have a draftable grade on Phil Maffa. I had him as a UDFA. But again, you're sitting here in the 7th round and you're basically almost to that spot anyway. And then a player that I didn't have also in my top 257, and that is another defensive tackle out of the University of Maryland, and Tommy Akinboiste. I probably screwed up that name. It's all right. 6'4", 306 pounds. He's a pretty good athlete. Going to need a lot of coaching. He's a player that maybe can provide some depth to their defensive line. But overall, I think the back end of the class, had some players there that I didn't have very high in my board. They took a flyer on Cornelius, and that maybe they can develop him into a rotational piece in the offensive line. Maybe he can be a swing tackle, maybe develop into a starter. And then I really liked the Jay Toya pick there. So overall, the Cowboys, my favorite pick in that draft was Donovan Ezeiruaku. That is just a phenomenal pick there. And then my player that I saw had the best value. So their best value pick in comparison to where I saw them on my board was Siobhan Ravel. Obviously, the most puzzling pick for some there is going to be Tyler Booker. I get it. It is definitely a reach there, but I understand what the Cowboys were trying to do. I'll cut him a little bit of slack. I don't think the back end of the draft was as good as I would have liked to have seen, and getting some special teams players, getting some guys with some higher end potential there. The Jay Toya probably being the best one of that behind blue, that 5th, 6th, 7th round. Take quite a few picks there. Overall, I gave the Dallas Cowboys an A- pick for their draft. So they came away, I think, 3 phenomenal draft picks there in the first 3 rounds. So overall, pretty solid draft for the Dallas Cowboys, and with an A- grade. That takes us to the city of brotherly love, and we have the Philadelphia Eagles. And their draft class, once again, is sparked by finding that guy that just falls down the draft board. And they were able to secure one of my favorite players in this draft, and that is Jihad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama. I absolutely love that player. He was number 7 on my board. So he had a top 10 ranking on my big board. The consensus had him at number 17. So they got incredible value. They were trying to trade up. When you see those draft war room videos and different reports from reporters, I think they started around pick 22 trying to trade up with the Chargers, and they were trying to find multiple teams to move up and go grab Jihad Campbell, who is just falling down the draft boards. I think this guy has all pro potential. You can play him as an edge. You can play him in the middle. I think he can play all over. I think he'd be a guy who could sit at the Sam position, and you could blitz him. He's a phenomenal blitzer, but he can cover as well. I think he's going to be a really, really good pro. I liked him better than Jalen Walker, because I think Jihad is a solid position at the NFL level. He's proven it in his college career that he can be a really good linebacker, unlike Jalen Walker, who is a player who I don't know if he has a set solid position at the pro level, which is why I had him higher. But really phenomenal pick. Howie Roseman and the Eagles, they just know how to work the draft board and got themselves a phenomenal steal again at the back end of the draft, picking up top 10, top 15 talent. I know we're going to have to wait. I know he's injured. He has the labrum. That is a concern. But I think at that poor spot in the draft, totally worth the pick. I did not think Jihad would be here. I really thought that around pick 19 to the Bucks, that's where he was going to go. This is a phenomenal pick by Howie Roseman and the Eagles. You come back in round 2, and they pick up a replacement for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Andrew Makuba, the safety out of Texas. He is a ball-hawking safety. I had him at number 79 on my big board. He went 64, so maybe a little bit early, but not a huge reach. I had him as my 4th rated safety in the draft. He's speedy. He loves to hit. He's a little wiry and thin, which concerns me with his play style. Given that play style is he can have some injury concern because he likes to play the big hit. His tackling reliability is okay. He's really good, smart football IQ. I think he's going to fit really well with the Eagles secondary. I think it's a solid pick. If you were going to go with the safety in that spot, I think that probably is the one that fit them the best based on what was left on the draft board. So a good solid pick there. He was 84 on the consensus board, just a little bit behind mine. So I know a lot of people really liked Andrew Makuba. So if they were looking for a ball hawking safety back there, that's a good pick. They come back in the 4th round. They get Ty Robinson. He is a player that can kind of move all around on the interior of that defensive line. He is an athletic freak. Again, it's going to fit very well with the Eagles there at pick 111. I had him as number 119 on my draft board. So right there, the consensus had him at 107. I think he's going to fit really nicely with the Eagles. Ty Robinson was one of those guys who I wanted my team to kind of target there. He is athletic. He's got good handwork. He can really help in run support. I think he's going to have to figure out to be a better pass rusher. And if you're going to go to a team that can help develop that, the Eagles is a great choice. And so then they came back in round 5. They went with Mac McWilliams, the cornerback out of UCF. He was one of my sleeper guys to watch on day 3. I had Mac McWilliams as a 4th round grade, my number 13 corner. I had him right behind Noah Williams and Dorian Strong, just ahead of Denzel Burke. I had him 134 on my draft board. So again, they get a really good value compared to I had him. The consensus had him at 211. I get it. He's a little bit undersized, about 5'10", 190-ish. He's really quick. He's really good at looking and undercutting the like crossing routes and stuff. But I think it was that size and that length that would, kind of moved him down the draft board. Doesn't have really good recovery speed, but I think Mac McWilliams can be a pretty good player. Solid pick there. I think he can develop into maybe a rotational cornerback there, playing the nickel. I think he does have some outside potential. Then in round 5, they get Samal Mondon Jr. out of Georgia. Again, another athlete. I liked Samal. I had him as my number 8 linebacker in this class. Overall on my draft board, I had him at 117. He goes 161. Again, really good value there. So I really liked that pick a lot. And then the Eagles came back in the 6th round here. Sorry, lost my choice. 5th round. I picked 168. And they nabbed Drew Kendall, the guard out of Boston College, at 6'4", 308 pounds. Kind of a developmental guy. I think he maybe can play center for them. Then they came back in the 6th round and got Kyle McCord, the quarterback. Philadelphia loves to snag those quarterbacks later in the draft, get a developmental guy. I liked Kyle McCord. I think he's one of those guys that maybe could kind of sneak in and be one of the surprise quarterbacks in this class. I had him as my 6th ranked quarterback overall. I had a 4th round grade on Kyle McCord. And then you came back in the 6th round again at pick 191 and then at pick 207 here. And they went with some developmental tackles in Miles Hinton out of Michigan, 6'7", 323 pounds. I think he's a reliable offensive lineman. I don't know if he really has that big of a ceiling. I think I saw him as maybe a rotational tackle at the NFL level. And then Cameron Williams, the offensive tackle out of Texas. He is a guy whose tape wasn't as great as you would have hoped to have seen in his last season at the University of Texas, but he has a lot of talent. He has some flashes there, and those 2 tackles went to the best possible spot that you could go to in the NFL if you are going to go and develop into getting a very good starter out of them. That's a great pick by the Eagles there. So you take a couple dart board shots there with Cameron Williams and Miles Hinton. Phenomenal value getting them at late in the draft. And you come back with Antoine Powell-Ryland, the edge rusher out of Virginia Tech. I think he can be a rotational player. I wasn't as super high on Antoine Powell-Ryland. I had him rated more at the end of my draft board there. I had him as my 24th rated edge rusher. I had him just ahead of guys like maybe Barron Sorrell, Ingram Dawkins, Josh Joyner, but he was in that kind of like behind some of those other guys that I really liked, like Ahmad Hassanin, who went to the Lions, definitely behind players like Tyler Barron or Kyle Kennard. So it kind of was like a borderline, like 5th round grade for me. To get him in the 7th round, I think maybe he can develop into a rotational player for them. Again, they're really good at developing defensive linemen. They're really good at developing offensive linemen. So, taking a stab there at pick 209. So overall, I think the Eagles had a really good draft. Obviously, the best pick, my favorite one, is Jihad Campbell. getting him in the first round. I think obviously he's also one of my players who had the highest value. Another good value pick there was Sam Almondon, the linebacker. Getting him, I had him ranked at 117. And so he went 44 spots higher than where I was in my draft board. And even on the consensus, as they had him at 124. Really, I think I could maybe nitpick a little bit with the back end of the draft how many spots are going to be available for for developmental offensive linemen. And so you grab 3 of them in this draft, 2 tackles and a guy who maybe can develop into a center, and Kendall from Boston College. So that's maybe my a little bit of a nitpick there, but I think it was a pretty solid draft for the Eagles. They didn't have a 3rd round pick. They had quite a few picks there in the 6th round. I think they had 4 picks in the 6th round. So overall, I gave the Philadelphia Eagles a solid B+ grade. I think scoring exceptional value in Jihad Campbell and having a pretty good draft the rest of the way. I don't know if how that plays out in the long run. I think you got a guy who's not necessarily going to see the field much in the first year. I don't see him starting this year. Makuba maybe could get on the field as a starter this year. So that's the kind of the nitpick a little bit of the Eagles draft, why it isn't a higher grade, even though they got good value compared to my board and the consensus board, is how many players did they get for this season who are going to contribute. Maybe one in Andrew Makuba. You got some backups out there, maybe the rotational piece there at Ty Robinson, but most of the other players are going to be some special teams, some time to develop. And it's a draft that really is going to look forward to the future as opposed to one that's going to make an impact this year. And so, again, I gave him a very solid B+. So now we're heading into the Big Apple, and we're going to break down the draft of the New York Giants. And so the New York Giants, they came away in the first round at the 3rd overall pick after some chaos there at pick 2, and they ended up going with Abdul Carter. So he was obviously one of the blue chip players in this class. You want to argue how many there were, 2, 3, 5 blue chip players, but Abdul Carter, phenomenal, by far the best edge rusher in this class. It's a home run slam dunk pick. I was surprised that they haven't moved on from Kayvon Thibodeau. So what it tells me is they're going to go back to their roots, and they're going to go back to the identity that the New York Giants previously had. And they have done a phenomenal job in this draft of building up the defensive line. I mean, absolute home run pick with Abdul Carter there. They didn't overthink it. They didn't trade out of that pick. They nabbed Abdul and then just moved on with their draft. They moved down into the first rounds. They did trade up. So we knew kind of that they were going to be looking to get a quarterback. They did not grab one last year, weren't able to. And now this year, they really need to get a developmental quarterback, and they picked Jaxon Dart, the quarterback out of Ole Miss. If you were going to take a flyer on a quarterback this year, Dart was one of those guys, or maybe a Jalen Milroe. A guy I really liked was Dylan Gabriel. But in this case, a lot of the league did like Jaxon Dart. I had him as number 55 on my board. The consensus had at 51. Obviously, it's a little bit of a reach, but when quarterback's a little bit of different ball of wax, right? Getting him in the first round, getting that 5th-year option can be vital because you want that quarterback on that rookie contract as long as possible. So if you're going to take a stab there, I think Jaxon Dart is worth the stab or the throw at the dartboard there. I like Jaxon Dart. I'm not overwhelmed with them like some other draft media is. I think, I don't know if it's a little bit of that he just got propelled up the draft board, by some buzz with the draft media. I think there's some potential there. Again, I have a solid 2nd round grade on him. Could he develop into a starter? I don't see the franchise quarterback in his game, but again, maybe he can develop into an adequate starter at the NFL level. Who knows how the season will go next year? Maybe the Giants again are sitting up there at the top of the draft board and they have an opportunity to get a quarterback again. But, I get having to do it. I get the situation that the management and coach in New York has put themselves in, that they have to go out and try to find a quarterback, because we all know in this league, if you don't have one, you're way behind the 8 ball. In fact, even if you have an average one, you're still going to be behind the 8 ball. You really need a good quality quarterback to an elite quarterback to have sustained long-term success in the NFL. So, what have I liked to have seen them not have to go to a quarterback and reach for one and have to trade some draft capital? Sure, absolutely. Understand the situation that they were in. So they didn't have a second round draft pick. They come back in the third round and they get an absolute steal, a value, and one of my favorite players in this draft. And that's Darius Alexander, the defensive tackle out of Toledo. A little bit older of a prospect. I had him in number 35 on my board. Consensus had him at 66. So if you're looking at the consensus big board, that's kind of dead on where he should go. I saw a really good player, a player who I think flashes some above average to very good starter material there. He has the size. He can move all over. He's going to be a really good chess piece for the coaching staff in New York. I think can play the run really well. I think he has some good pass rush ability to him. So I think this is a phenomenal pick by the New York Giants. They've really, really bolstered that defensive line. Excellent value. Darius Robinson was one of my defensive sleeper guys, one of those gems. I had him ranked pretty high. So if you looked at my defensive tackle rankings, which you can go back and watch my defensive tackle rankings, but I had Darius Alexander as my 5th rated defensive tackle. I did have him ahead of Tyleik Williams, who went in the first round, but I had quite a few defensive tackles there at second round grades. Great pick by the New York Giants. I love the fit. It's going to work really well for the New York Giants. And you come back at pick 105, get a great compliment to Tyrone Tracy, who they picked last year, and get Cameron Scadaboo. He is a fun player to watch. I think he is going to be a great fit for the New York Giants, can come in, be their workhorse, bell cow back, and pair him up with Tracy, who can be that receiving back, but also can spell him really well, be more of the home run hit. That's going to be a great pairing there with the New York Giants. I had Cam Scadaboo at 48 on my big board, was really high in him. Consensus had him at 86. He goes at 105. Great value. And they come back in the 5th round at pick 154. They get Marcus Bowe, the offensive tackle out of Purdue. I see him more as a guard. So in my rankings, I did have Marcus Bowe listed in my guard rankings. So I had him as my 7th rated guard. So can he play tackle? I think it's worth a shot trying to get him to play tackle, but I really think that his hands and his hand work and his size are going to be much better suited on the inside. I don't think he's going to be go very well against the superior athletic edge rushers out in the phone booth on the outside. So I think that, again, this is a really good, solid pick by the New York Giants. Get great value here in the 5th round, in Marcus Bowe out of Purdue. Then they didn't have a 6th round pick. They come back in the 7th round at pick 219. And again, they get another guy I was really high on. I think you get an athletic tight end in Thomas Finoni II. I think he's a guy who can contribute in the passing game. He's a natural pass catcher, really good hands. He has tremendous potential. I think as in the 7th round, taking a shot at him. I had him 140 on my draft board. Consensus had him at 184. Again, tremendous value. And then the 7th round, they got a guy I didn't really know much at all about, and that's Corey Black, the cornerback out of Oklahoma State. Didn't get a chance to review him, read up on him at all. Both myself, and the consensus big board did not have him in their top 257 players at all. So the Giants overall, I think they got really great value in Marcus Bowe. He was kind of my best value pick. I think the best pick that they made outside of Abdul Carter is Cam Scadaboo. I think he's going to make an immediate impact. And then the pick that I just wish they didn't have to make, and is the most puzzling to me in this draft class, is Jaxon Dart. Not getting the quarterback last year, maybe it would have been a better use of resources, try to figure out a way to come away with a JJ McCarthy, a Michael Penix, a Bo Nix, and have that quarterback already established, and then come back with a wide receiver this year and not have to give up the draft capital. I get it. The wide receiver class was much better last year, but so was quarterback class. So as we saw in last year's draft, all those offensive players going in the front end. So it is what it is. It's the position that they put themselves in, and they ended up desperate having to go get a quarterback. But overall, their draft was a really solid draft. Not a lot of reaches. I gave the New York Giants a very solid A- draft grade. So I think they did a really good job in this year's NFL draft. I think they're going to come away with quite a few starters there. I think you got 3 starters for sure that are going to see the field this year in Carter, Alexander, and Scadabo. I think you might see some action in limited role with Fedoni the second there. So overall, I think they came away with a really solid draft. It's an A- draft for the New York Giants. And if Jaxon Dart pans out to be at least a starter at the NFL level, I know they're going to sit him this year, but down the road, if he does pan out to be a starter, I think you got yourself a really, really good draft, one of the better draft classes and one of the better drafts in this year's draft. So overall, I think most of the NFC East teams did a really good job. And so thank you guys so much for joining me on tonight's episode of the Draft Beard podcast as we recap the NFC East. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. I would really appreciate it as we are now in off-season mode post the draft. So thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will see you on the next episode of the Draft Beard podcast.
The Draft Beard Podcast.